Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome today to the second of our panel discussion as part of the Fashion Open Studio series at Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week, Berlin. Today, we are discussing relationships, catalysts, and people who inspire change. And we're going to have a conversation with a focus on relationships, the unsung heroes, the unseen technicians, workers, and people behind the scenes without whom the fashion industry wouldn't function. I'm Tamsin Blanchard. I'm the curator of Fashion Open Studio, which is a fashion revolution initiative. And I'm going to start briefly by just drawing your attention to the Fashion Revolution Manifesto, which, if you haven't seen it, it's really worth having a look at and maybe even signing if you agree with it. But Fashion Revolution Manifesto Point 4 says, fashion respects culture and heritage. It fosters, celebrates, and rewards skills and craftsmanship. It recognizes creativity as its strongest asset. It says that fashion never appropriates without giving due credit or steals without permission. Fashion honors the artisan. This seems central to our discussion today. So I'm happy to welcome here today Sydney Nakwama, the founder of Emeka Suits, which is an upcycling tailoring brand in Berlin. Priyanka Munyappa from Grandma Would Approve, which is an artistic and creative upcycling brand based in India. And Monica Moisin, who founded CIPRI, which is the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative, which brings a legal framework to communities of artisans to protect their cultural heritage and to highlight the importance of their work and their textile heritage. Welcome, each of you. I'm just going to ask you quickly if you would introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your work. Let's start with Priyanka.
Okay, hi guys, I'm Priyanka Munyappa. I am a designer and a photographer based out of Bangalore City, all the way down here in India. And I started Grandma Would Approve with my best friend about 2.5 years ago. We basically saw there's a lot of dumping that happens in India, especially with old clothes and secondhand clothing. So, because we saw that there was such an excess of material in the country currently, we felt like it was kind of in our duty to start reworking on it and reusing these garments and upcycling them so that so that the wastage doesn't happen and at least these garments get a second chance at life. So this is why we started Grandma Would Approve, and it's basically based on the philosophy of our grandmothers. And yeah, it's really rooted in our culture because in India we have the hand-me-down culture is really prevalent here, and because the families are so large, so it's something that's a very big part of our culture as well. So for us, that's really important to take the old and make it relevant for today's age. So that's us here.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, and it's
Yeah.
really, really wonderful for you to have you making your European debut here
Yeah.
as
Thank you so
part of
much.
the showcase. And if anybody hasn't already, please do check out Grandma Would Approve and Emeka Suits on Fashion Open Studio. You can go to the website and you can have a look at the showcase and the exhibition and the videos on there, which are great. So Emeka, Sydney, tell us a little bit more about you and your work.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sydney Wakama. My second name is Emeka, so it's not wrong if you say Emeka. People call me Emeka all the time. Yeah, I'm the founder and creative director of Emeka Suits. And what we do is that we work together with tailors in Kenya with whom we create clothing, mainly these suits that I'm wearing right now, from old materials that come from the global north. Those are the materials that people throw into the second-hand bins, right? And they get sorted, and then they get pressed, and like the good stuff stays in Europe, and the bad stuff gets shipped to the global south and ends up on like big piles and creates a lot of waste, and also destroys a big, textile market. A lot of tailors go out of work. So what we are doing is that we conquer this a little bit by, providing opportunities to local tailors and making something out of this basically waste material that is flooding the African markets. Yeah, that's what Emeka is about.
So interesting that you're both working with secondhand waste materials, but very, very different outcomes, which just shows how important the creative process is in all of this. Monica, tell us about your work. You're not a designer, but you do a lot of work for and with designers and the artisan community. Tell us about a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Tamsin. I'm not a designer, but I always say there's design thinking in everything we do, basically. And as a lawyer, although I'm a lawyer and I have a legal background, I design systems that would help the textile and fashion ecosystem thrive in a world of well-being and cultural sustainability. I work with cultural sustainability, and I refer to it as the transmission of traditional knowledge and traditional expressions to future generations, keeping them relevant and contemporary at the same time. So what we do at the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative, basically, we are a bit of a Robin Hood kind of character. We try to create a legal system that protects the rights of indigenous people, ethnic groups, and local communities. These types of rights are not necessarily recognized in many countries, so we try to create new types of rights. We call them cultural intellectual property rights, and we think the fashion industry, the fashion and textile industry, is the go-to or the major supporter, the major impact creator in the space, impact investor in the space, if you want. So we believe a lot in these ethical and co-creative relationships between artisans, between local communities, and the fashion and design ecosystem.
Okay, great. Thank you. What a fantastic group of people. I think staying with you, Monica, I'd like to ask you about your grandmother and the link that she made apparent to you that was linking to your cultural textile heritage and why that's so important to you.
I think my story, it evolved a little bit around both my grandmothers, both my maternal and my paternal grandmother. My maternal grandmother was a lawyer, and as a very young kid, I always wanted to be a lawyer like her because I was impressed by her outfits. She has always been very, very elegant, and always everything she wore was tailor-made. At the time in Romania, there was no textile industry similar to the fast fashion system. It was very much that everyone that could afford to have more clothes done, they would have a tailor that they would go to, and you could see, these dresses could be enlarged. If you gained a bit of weight, you didn't have to throw them away. You would just adjust. Like, there was always so much design thinking in the tailoring that I got to experience personally when I started working in India, because in India the same system is part of how clothes are made, and I found that amazing, and a connection that I had from my grandmother and carried into my work today. In a way, I ended up calling this sustainability by design. or tailored sustainability in different work that I've been doing. And the other grandmother, she never pursued higher education, but I think she only had 8 classes, and she was very skilled. She did all kinds of things. Like, she was a mini cultural entrepreneur. She did a lot of things, a multi-potentialite to survive, to bring income at home. And textiles, embroidery, and weaving were things that she did firstly for herself. And to me, it was impressive to see the garments that she had to create as she was 15, because it was a sign of coming to age for a woman in our community. These amazing pieces that she always wanted me to analyze, to take out in the fresh air, and get them, clean them up when I was there in summer. She wanted me to wear them and to learn how to wear them properly. And she explained to me the different symbols, the colors, why did she wear this, and what it meant. And when I graduated law school and I started working in a legal industry, I realized that what I wanted to do was to work with artisans, and that was not possible. As a lawyer at that time, there was no way you could do that without being seen as a I don't know, someone that won't be very successful in the legal profession. So then I went back to my grandmother's village and I said, I need to find a way. I need to understand what the connection is between law and textile heritage. And that's how, the stories of both my grandmothers came together.
So really, I mean, it's really lovely to hear that. Yeah, you're the catalyst for change. Actually, can be very close to you. And Priyanka, obviously, grandma was the kind of inspiration really behind your brand. Was that your grandma?
Fortunately, I have a little, of course, she has a very interesting story, but I have a sadder story to this. So, both my mother and their father, my father, their moms passed away when they were really young. Like, when my mom has often, she's never met her biological mom, and my dad's mom passed away when he was 3. So because of that, the question, would grandma approve, has been something that's been very important for me, because I've had this huge part of, like, let's say, even my family, like my parents' history, like almost wiped out. Like, we have no idea who these people were, what they liked, what their interests were. We have no idea. So for me, that question of, like, would grandma approve? Would she, like, would this be something that grandma would agree with, or so that was my perspective through which I approached the brand. And then my partner, however, Anugrah, he has a very close relationship with his grandmother, and literally before she passed away, he was holding her hand and she left. So for him, he had that very strong relationship. So for him, he knew that his grandma would approve, and for me, it was always the question, would grandma approve? So when both of us kind of came in together to start the brand, it kind of fell into place with those two perspectives. Like, anything we would make, I would be like, would grandma approve? And he would, say, yeah, I think she would. So it's kind of like, in some way, we internalize the voice of our grandmothers and kind of speak like, they have taken over us. It's almost like that kind of a feeling. And so for me, that was very important, that I would still, like, channelize the feeling of having a grandmother, or the feeling that there is someone out there, my guardian, who's, like, looking after us, or taking care of us, or taking care of our well-being. So it kind of comes from that place as well, that it could be. So I'm always fascinated by meeting people's grandmothers. I'm fascinated by sitting and talking with them, and I think it's so lovely. And so for me, the brand was kind of my way to fill that gap of not having grandmothers. So that's the relationship I have with it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the idea that grandma's approval really is a set of values that you work by and that have really kind of created the purpose of your brand. which is,
Exactly.
really lovely. Yeah, and
Thank you.
Sydney, I mean, you have family, there's family kind of catalysts really in your story, aren't there? Your cousin, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. I don't have a grandma story, which is like I feel left out now, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
have
didn't
a
want to ask you
cousin.
directly because it's personal.
No, but I also had a cool grandma. Like, yeah, my Nigerian grandma, she was a hit. Also a fashion icon. Wow, very loud in her clothing, very loud. But yeah, about my cousin, I think you were referring to how my brand started, and yeah, my tie to the African continent, my family in Nigeria. I was there to visit my family basically, and yeah, we were sitting there with my cousin. My cousin is a very educated guy, very clever, very willing, has a lot of drive, and I asked him like, "What do you want to do? Like, what's your next move? What do you want to, make?" And he was just like, "It's difficult. There are not many opportunities here. It's things are difficult." And I know that, and I see that because I've been there many times now. Um, so yeah, we came up with the idea of like, okay, if there is so much potential, so many people that want to do stuff, what if we not try to create something that is based on the continent, that creates opportunities for people to get work and to make things happen. And yeah, this happened now through clothing, through this brand, and it's beautiful to see how it develops in the sense of like, okay, now we have tailors working there, not in Nigeria but in Kenya. Long story to that, I'm not going to get into that.
Mhm.
But also from the creative side of things, like I have photographers from Ghana reaching out. I have models from Nigeria asking me to, like I feel there's a very interesting link of like just people being like, this is from here. We can identify with this. This is something we wanna do something with. We can get creative with that. And I feel that's exactly the sort of spirit that we wanted to make or wanted to have when we first started this brand. Like, yeah, just an open field of creativity for everyone to kind of like dip in and make something happen.
Mhm. And do they help you in terms of just encouragement, in terms of just kind of spurring you on? Because I know how difficult it is, particularly over the last year or so, working on your own brand, just to have somebody, within your network who's saying, yeah, what you're doing is right, it's great, keep going.
Totally. I think that's super important. Yeah, to have the feeling of community, to have a feeling of like, oh, I am being supported, I'm being held. I feel like without that, no one would be able to do anything in this world, no? So I feel
Mm.
the sort of support that I feel from the African continent, but also from the people in the diaspora is amazing. I'm very flattered. Yeah.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about the tailors that you work with? Is it a collaborative process?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little tailor collective basically in a small town close to Mount Kenya. I got there very randomly. Also, a long story how I got there, but like I got to know them, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So many talented tailors. I mean, 8 or something, not many, but and they then showed me these markets where all of these second-hand clothes come, and I was like, wow, this is so much stuff. Like, what to do with all of this. And yeah, and then I found this curtain, and I asked them, can you make me a suit out of this curtain? And they made me this killer suit, and that was really the start of it all in a way. And so yeah, it is a collaborative process. I go there every half a year now or something, maybe every year. And I spent 3 months there early this year, and I just work with them. I'm there every day. I'm with them cutting fabrics, putting things together, seeing what works, what doesn't work. I feel to put in this sort of time and energy to be involved in the process and to be involved with the people is so much more valuable than just whatever, printing out a pattern and sending it off to Portugal, where some huge industry of like, you know, hundreds of tailors. They put it together and it's done, and no one really knows who, you know, who designed this, who is behind this, like what are their lives like and stuff. So I feel the sort of brand that I want to build is should feel more like a family than a company.
I think this really must have resonance for you, Priyanka. You work very closely with the tailor. You have one head tailor who you work with who looks like
Yeah.
a technical wizard. Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, sure. So my team currently we just employed our third tailor, so we just expanded slightly. And so my main head tailor, his name is Karthik, and basically what had happened was about 5 years ago, my elder brother had actually started the design studio in my ground floor in my basement, and Karthik used to be, but when he was working with him, he was just a junior tailor. He didn't have that much experience. He was still just he was doing more of the basic work. And what happened was he ended up getting an opportunity to go to Singapore for 2 years and work as a supervisor in a factory there. So in Singapore, he kind of got that exposure that he needed, you know, the international exposure of what really the market wants, the quality required, and everything. So when I decided to start my brand and I contacted him, he was that much more experienced 2 3 years later. So when I finally wanted to start my brand, he immediately came on board, because when I told him that my idea was reconstruction, he understood it, because he said that in Singapore a lot of people do reconstruction there. So it didn't take much for him to understand what I was speaking about. And basically, the first thing that my partner and me did when we started the brand was we took clothes from our closets. We kind of emptied out our closets and we saw, you know, what are the vintage clothes that we have collected over time. So those were the first garments that were cut up and used. So during that time, I could just see him getting so excited, because he was like, what is happening internationally? He couldn't believe that we were kind of doing this in Bangalore, and that we was like starting reconstruction here, because especially in India, reconstruction is not much, like a lot of people don't get into it. And I think maybe even Grandma Would Approve is one of the first few brands that are doing reconstruction properly. So that way he was very interested. And you know, he told me he because he's only traditionally been trained as a tailor, he never knew pattern making, and he would look at his supervisor and he would, you know, have lunch with his pattern master in the factory to kind of learn some tricks and trades and, you know, learn how to do it. So for me that's very inspiring, because he's self-taught, and it's so amazing that through his experience as a tailor and through his experience of working in a factory, he still moved past his own fears and kind of learned pattern making. And especially when he came and started working for me, I told him that in Grandma Would Approve, I don't want to make anything that's already been made, that I want to challenge that, and that I want to make something completely new and kind of make experimental patterns. So for him, he's a very excited individual. He's full of life. He's a small man, but packed with a whole lot of energy, and he's just so adorable. He's like family. I've known him for about 7 years now outside the brand, and he's really amazing. And with him, he always tells me that it seems that the ideas that I have in my head, he knows that he can execute them. So he's always excited, you know, to see what I come out with next, because he's like, okay, can we try this, can we try this? So there's a lot of like creative freedom. He gets to pick, you know, like he gets to give me his suggestions. So it's a very collaborative space. And especially with my tailors, I don't consider myself to be a boss. Rather, like for me, I need to know what their opinion is. I need to know what they think. I want them to have the creative freedom as well to create something. So apart from the reconstructed garments, we also do restoration of vintage garments. So for all of those, I always give them creative freedom. I tell them, okay, can you show me what you can do? Can you surprise me? You know, so these kind of things, they make them, you know, they challenge them to be more creative and to bring out their own design sense. So like over this period of time now, I don't even sometimes have to give them color combinations. They themselves put it together, or they themselves draw out a pattern or a design. So that way, uh, I feel like they are an extension of me. I'm an extension of them. We're all kind of, like intertwined. Everything's intertwined, and it's a really nice collaborative space. And there's no space to get bored, because every piece is different, every piece is unique. So even for the tailor, that saturation is not happening, where they're not saturated with the same kind of work that, it feels depressing after a while to do the same kind of work. So I can keep them creatively engaged by constantly making new stuff, different kinds of things, experimental. So that way, yeah, it's a very nice collaborative space, and we really get each other, and and they understand the concept of the grandmother, and they understand. So even for them, they never thought that they would ever look at old clothes the way they do now. And in just a year and a half of running the brand, they've completely changed their perspective towards old clothes. So even for me, that's really amazing to like see that. Yeah.
Sounds as though,
So this
yeah,
is kind of,
you're all catalysts
yeah,
for each other in a way.
yeah.
Monica, this must be really interesting for you, because I think what both Emeka and Grandma are doing is absolutely valuing the artisans, honouring the cultural textile heritage, everything that brands in an ideal world should be doing. But you work a lot as well with designers and brands who aren't doing that. And I'm wondering what happens, what have you seen happening when a designer doesn't value those things and, in fact, doesn't even acknowledge their existence? What happens when those relationships are lost?
Well, in fact, I haven't been working directly with designers that don't do or don't want to do that, because usually when what I do is I design benefit sharing strategies and models, business models that are based on honoring the artisans or the craft custodians, the communities, and ensuring that a fair and ethical exchange takes place. We also look at the design process, for example, with the Cultural Sustainability Academy that we launched earlier this year at the by CIPRI. We have a fully integrated and holistic program educating stakeholders in the fashion industry, designers, creative directors, CEOs of different brands, what to take into account when approaching or when creating any kind of product, not necessarily working with a community, but maybe something that is inspired from a community. But what I've been working with is on creating responses to abusive behavior in the fashion industry. For example, when a big fashion company has copied traditional design of the Oma ethnic group in Laos, a one-on-one digitally printed copy of the originally embroidered design, together with our partners at the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center in Laos, we created a response, and that response was a database of traditional designs that the Oma ethnic group of Nanam village in Laos are custodians of, and that represents a first step for them for two purposes. One, for them to have a collection of their designs and be able to build upon that collection and also transmit this knowledge to the new generations, and have the community involved with technology as well, which is important so that we don't leave anyone behind in this process of global digitalization. And second, it represents an invitation to designers to collaborate with the OMA, to use these techniques, to use their designs, but in collaboration, in co-design. And there's a framework that the database approves of, or like that the database promotes, and that the OMA also agreed to work within. And this is the 3Cs rule that we created at CIPRI, and the 3Cs framework that we try to promote in the fashion industry as a baseline, as a guideline, if
Can
you
you tell
want.
us the three C's?
Absolutely. So they stand for consent, credit, and compensation. Consent means the obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of community representatives or artisans themselves, whatever you want to engage in a collaboration, so that but this free, prior, and informed consent means that they know what the purpose of the design is, they know what your business plan is, they know, they have the information to take a fully informed decision, and nothing is being withheld from them, or said, yeah, we want to research this, and in the end you commercialize it at large scale and they get nothing from it. Then acknowledging the source of inspiration, so the origin, the community that it comes from, the artisan that it comes from, and compensating financially or sometimes non-financially, so with additional forms of compensation, if that is the case. Like many people forget, for example, that even doing research, like doing the research in certain communities, is also or should be compensated in a way, because we take knowledge and we then use it and distribute it, and often, or there was a time when these communities were not aware of what can happen when this knowledge is being disseminated further outside of the community. But now we live in a time when communities know, and they become, reticent also to sharing their knowledge, because there's no framework that also guarantees that they are protected and respected, as they would feel they deserve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's so important. And are you optimistic now that communities can feel protected and can get their rightful compensation for the work and for the work that their communities have done for centuries?
I think we've seen a lot of change in the past years, at least since I can only speak from my experience and the time that I've been personally invested in this work and cause, and that is now a little bit over 5 years. And in this time, at the time, we had conversations about consent in the fashion industry, but at a very limited level. There was never, do artisans have to consent to, or it wasn't a conversation that we had in a fashion space. And now we talk not only about cultural appropriation and polarizing views on that, because it's not something that you can say yes or no, or it's not something that you can say this is the clear limit between misappropriation and appropriation. In that sense, can have positive effects if it's done in a form of borrowing values, borrowing identities, if there's a context that it's explained, if we think until I call it always till the last consequence. What happens to the last individual involved in the supply chain? What can happen to these people? We have to take that into account. So now we are thinking things a lot more through. There's more transparency, there's more openness. We start to understand that it's an ecosystem mentality that we need to have, and it's not about competing on a market. We have to collaborate, and that's the only way that we can transition, that we can sustain this industry itself. That we need to create synergies between fashion and craft, that they're not separate things, that textiles exist before trends, and that cultural identities will always be trendy, because we need to belong, and we need to have an identity. And it's very interesting what's happening now. So I'm very hopeful. I am hopeful, otherwise I couldn't be doing this for so long, because there's been so many hurdles, and so many times I heard, this is never gonna happen, and I refuse to believe it. So we are disseminating, this framework. We are encouraging people to reach out. We are encouraging people to apply it to their businesses, and when they apply it, to communicate that they, are complying to it, or that at least certain elements of the framework are respected, and asking the bigger players to also commit to proving that consent, credit, and compensation is, part of their supply chain, or is considered when sourcing and when collaborating with different stakeholders.
Okay, yeah, no, it's brilliant work that you're doing. And it makes me think, actually, Sydney, just talking about cultural identities, I was thinking about you've talked about when you started out that you were looking at African wax cloth, batik wax cloth, and you purposely decided not to use it. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that you did and what you found from that?
Yeah, sure. So what many people associate with African fabrics, this wax print, Ankara fabrics, they have many different names. Very the colorful pattern stuff, right, that everyone knows. Um, yeah, we first started working with that. That was back in Nigeria, back with my cousin. We started to make some shirts from that, you know. Oh, cool, oh, nice. But I was like, okay, where does this actually come from? Who is this actually benefiting? And as I did my research on that, I was actually quite surprised that I even grew up in the thinking that these are, you know, traditional African textiles. My dad used to wear it all the time. You know, all of my aunties, my grandma, everyone, like everyone wears this. But if you go into the history of it, it actually comes from Bali, Indonesia, and is you know, the batik. They used to use wax to create patterns on fabrics, and when the colonizers came, in this case the Dutch, they basically took this sort of you know, way of altering the fabric. They industrialized it. They, you know, built machines that could do it way faster and way bigger, basically, and started to sell this to the world. So yeah, again, it comes from a colonial history. Interestingly enough, though, it didn't really catch on in the rest of the world, because people were like, "Whoa, this is a lot of pattern, a lot of color." You know, like especially Europeans, like this too much for the people. But African people were in love with this stuff. So yeah, what you see now as like part of the of yeah, also like the African identity in a way, is actually, you know, going way back to colonial history, to the Balinese craftsmanship, um, that got, you know, then transformed and ended up to be this product and this cultural identity, or like, yeah, how do you say that, like a piece of cloth that holds cultural identity in the way how we see it today. I find it quite interesting, but again, for me and what I wanted to do with this brand, it was simply not suitable, because I don't like no African communities actually benefiting from this. Like all of the big wax print brands and companies are Dutch, so it's like you know, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, no, super interesting. And now your supply chain actually still kind of relies on waste fabrics and stuff that's dumped from the global north. So you're kind of creating a new cultural identity using those discarded fabrics.
Yeah, I like that, to create a new cultural identity, because in the end culture is always moving, no, it's nothing stagnant. So for people to be like, oh, if this is not real African fabrics or something, I'm not going to wear it anymore, like it's not that easy. Like things develop over a long period of time. People assimilate to, you know, whatever it is that is available to them, and yeah, and in that sense we are all part of shaping culture and creating cultural identities. And yeah, and I think with my project now, what I'm aiming at is to create an identity around what it means to wear something that is considered waste, and that, you know, make it look cool, and create an identity around that where people feel like, oh, this is something I want to be part of, this is something I can identify with. I want to have that as like my uniform, you know. So
Mm.
yeah, I think it is an experiment we're all constantly doing. Like, what can culture be? what are the stories that we tell each other, and how do we implement them into our lives, into our habits, into our style.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's really exciting about, a new way of expressing yourself through clothes. I just want to say, if anybody has any questions, please do put them in the question box and we'll get to them at the end. Priyanka, I just wanted to move on to you and just ask you a little bit more about the other people that you work with and your relationship with Anugrah and how
Yes.
you found each other and how you work together.
Yeah, so currently our team it's a really small team. We basically do everything, and so I have three tailors. I'm the design head, and Anugrah is the creative head, and he's basically been one of my closest friends for about 9 years now, and. He's not from Bangalore, but he moved here about 10 years ago to study, and we actually met at a photo shoot. I had seen him hang out with a friend of mine, and I felt he was really cool. And I basically I said, "Can you please give me his contact? I want to shoot him for a photo shoot that I have." And so that's how we became friends, and we haven't stopped being friends since then. And he's basically a fashion stylist, and that's his bread and butter. So because he's in fashion styling, he knows how much wastage really happens in the industry because of the photo shoots. They go and they buy something, they never use it again, and it's kind of just dumped and wasted. So he was also feeling that pressure, that what is this? Brands are always, giving us a styling budget, making us buy the garments, but once it's bought, it's not used again. It's just discarded. It's thrown away. So he knew that he was a part of this kind of wasteful culture. So one day we were just sitting on his couch in his house, and we were talking about the vintage scene in India. We were talking about how reconstruction is not really a thing. Nobody's really doing much with it. And we were talking about the hand-me-down culture within our families, how because we have older siblings, garments are always getting passed down to us, and how uh, because of because we're much smaller in size, like compared to our siblings, like we'd always snip the garment on two sides, tie it up to kind of make it fit us, better. So we would always do these little things, like my mother would give me her saris to make a birthday dress out of it instead of going out and buying something. So, these kind of little things were always happening within our own lives. So when we finally decided, to start the brand, it all just it was divine timing, really, and it all just came together perfectly. And it was like, okay, the test of the 9-year friendship was there, and he's a stylist, I'm a designer. We know people in the industry. We know the photographers. We know the models. We know everybody. Basically, all our friends are leading the scene right now, like whether they are in marketing or whether they're in production or anything. Like all of our friends are kind of running the show. So we, especially in terms of community, we know our community. We're very well aware of who is who, and who is doing what. So even when we came on and we started the brand, it was immediately kind of absorbed in by the crowd because they immediately just got it. And it was as though India was waiting for Grandma Would Approve when we came out, and they really absorbed us in like that. And we were really happy to see that that stigma around we could start changing it, and that we could change that narrative as well. And so the thing is about so one of my main vendors, his name is Tahir, and the thing is about 10 years ago I stumbled upon his secondhand store, and he himself didn't know that they were vintage garments in his store. He just assumed that they were just secondhand clothes. So um, while I was studying in college, whatever they would teach us in college about garments through the ages, I would go and find the same garments in his shop, like something with the same kind of silhouette. So basically I started teaching my vendor how to identify vintage clothes, based on construction, based on print, color, buttons, different kinds of elements. So even if I wouldn't be there, he would send me a message with a photograph and say, hey, is this your style, is this your style? So over a period of time, over these 10 years, I've been teaching my vendor how to identify vintage and vintage garments. So over the period of time, initially he used to feel very, my vendor used to feel kind of feel like, oh, I'm not really having a respectable job, all my friends are doing something better, I just have a secondhand clothing shop, like, is it even something that's valid, is it even good? But then I came into his life and I changed that perspective for him, and I showed him that there are actually like beautiful pieces with him, like amazing pieces, and that, even when I told him I wanted to start the brand, he was so encouraging of that. He immediately said, yes, let me help you with anything you need. So in fact, he's not only my vendor, he helps me with all my supplies, all my stitching supplies, everything. Like, I just have to give him a list, he gets it done for me, and he's basically been helping me set up the business and all the back end work. He's been helping me, and he's not only my vendor, he's a friend as well, and he's made me meet his whole family, and he has invited me over for food. And so anytime I make a new garment, I always share it with him, and he shares it with his whole family. They have like a huge family of like 40 people, so he shares it with everybody and says, oh, see what Priyanka has made with our clothes from our shop. So even for him, it's a matter of pride now, even for him, because it was his garments from his store that were used to make that collection for Berlin. So for him, it's a matter of pride, because he would have never imagined that those clothes that were just lying there would get converted into something beautiful and get made into something and actually have an international debut. Like, so this is that collaborative space, and this is
And
that,
I think
like
I think
sorry,
increasingly,
what?
sorry to cut you off. I think increasingly these relationships are really going to be important to nurture. And Sydney, do you have a similar relationship with any of your vendors? Do they know what you're looking for? Have you kind of created those kind of networks, or do you go out and hunt for your raw materials yourself?
Yeah, I mean, on the markets, people know us by now. Like when we go to the markets, they see us and like, the guys that buy all of the curtain materials. We're like, yeah, we're back. Like, so yeah, it's a personal connection for sure. Some of them, it's just beautiful to see that, even though we are still a small brand and we spend small money compared to whatever big brands, we're still having an impact directly on people's lives. Like there's this woman called Mama Emanuel. She is called Mama Emanuel because she's the mother of her son called Emmanuel. And like I go to her store like every week basically, and we always buy something from her. And one day, Emmanuel was there, like her son, and she said, "Look, you see him? You put him to school this month. You put him to school this month." And I was like, "Wow, crazy!" From the few fabrics that we bought, to make these items, to now a kid like having education. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
what a brilliant story. Absolutely love that.
Yeah.
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 We're running low on time, but Monica, I just wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on this, and also if there were any other connections that you've made that have really helped you or are helping others to make change.
I think what we see from both Priyanka's and Sydney's examples is that when you have a small scale production and when you focus more on the value that you communicate, the processes that you communicate, the people that are part of the supply chain, the general satisfaction and level of happiness, enthusiasm, and profitability in the end, because you cannot it's not that kind of money wouldn't make you as happy as you are knowing that you've put someone to school and you know exactly this is Emmanuel. You see Emmanuel in 5 years from now where he got to. This is amazing. If we can have this kind of feeling, if we can communicate this kind of energy to the whole system, um, this would just make the world thrive. And this is what what we do in a way by working or trying to change the system in a way that they recognize all the individuals across the supply chain, from the artisans, whatever tribal communities, to tailors and other stakeholders across the supply chain, as knowledge partners, as family. When it's not good for them, it's not good for you. When you start to feel this kind of connection, this ecosystemic connection, and I think it's beautiful, and I think it's amazing that and these stories should be communicated more and more. I think this is what I love about these projects, that you know about the person who has the vintage store, and you know about the lady whose son, and I think these are the stories. I love to wear these stories, as I wear stories from people that I work with, and I know what Gaurav thought when he created this, and I know the personal stories of the people. And for me, this is how I like to dress. And I think in time, our mentality as a collective will change, and we will love to wear stories again, because this is how it was, right? Like, all the embroidered garments of my grandmother were stories that she wove. She would spend months, weaving those and embroidering them. And those were stories, memories, struggles, challenges. And it's when we think of the world like that, and of clothes that we wear like that, I think it makes a very big difference. And in, the people that I work with, they all have these kind of stories. One beautiful story is this Mahila print project that we created in Bagru with Jeremy Fritzhand, who was an American student who moved to Bagru in India, close to Jaipur, and set up this collective. Was called. And when we met in 2019, he had started this project. He wanted to see women artisans co-designing with designers. So our third partner in the project, Petra Valentova, she's a designer, and she works a lot with different kinds of block prints, and she has her own brand, Imprinted Story, and she started doing these educational workshops with the women artisans to just spark creativity a bit. And she said, okay, we have all these different blocks that it's the same kind of symbol that has been carved for ages. But what if we carve something that you come up with, and they designed, the logo of Mahila print is a hand, and it's Sushila's hand, one of the women, who just was like, oh, I want my hand to be carved on this. And it's an amazing design, and it was so successful. And the model that we created was that the industry is so afraid of saying that artisans actually are creative and that they have design knowledge, and there's design thinking in there. So we made a model that is based on that, where the IP holders are the women artisans. And when you source fabric from Mahila print, there's always a royalty fee that goes to the creator of the design. And that is one of the women of the collective. And obviously, besides that, you have, all the production costs, but on top of that, you have this royalty fee. And this was something that was like, when we went there to do the to sign the agreements with the women artists, they just didn't understand, how do you get money for not working? Like, how is that possible? What is that? And that was like, because you create. And I said, but it was so fun to create the first design. That workshop was so fun. And we're like, yes, you get paid for that fun, because that fun was creativity, and that was your work and your creative spirit put into, and it's about explaining concepts that we work in the tech industry with, and in a fashion, and it's all IP rights everywhere, but not everyone really understands what those are. So then we tried to translate them into a business model in the textile space, and that was one of the most enriching experiences for me, because I also didn't understand, how do I have to communicate my legal knowledge to the industry and the stakeholders here. I think I was a lot more activistic and a lot more, maybe a bit more, there was more legalese in my language when I started a couple of years back in 2018, when we launched the initiative. And now I found a way I realized that as a mediator and as a facilitator, I have to speak both languages and immerse in both realities, and they helped me do that to a great
I think
extent.
that's so important. Yeah, the language, and I love that idea of wearing these stories. I just think that's, you know, once once you know the story of the clothes that you're wearing, you respect those clothes, you feel proud of wearing them, you respect each other, you understand who made your clothes. I mean, there begins the change, and I think that is really wonderful. I'm just Priyanka, we're really running low on time, but go on. No, go on.
No, I just wanted to say that, if we imagine the informal sector of secondhand clothing industry to be like a mycelium network, nobody actually realizes that these people know everybody in that network, and that it's like my one vendor knows 50 other vendors in India, and it's a huge network. So what we often don't realize is that even though these people are in the back end, they are actually the ones that are kind of running the show, or rather even keeping those connections going, so I just wanted to add that point, that I do see the informal sector almost like a mycelium network, the importance of it to be like that, so interconnected, and it's how do you say, it's so complete and it's so full, and if you give these people that time, energy, and importance and friendship, then they will do anything for you, and they'll always be there for you, so this is just something I wanted to say and add as
Oh, I
well.
love that. And I think actually that's a really wonderful note to end on. Yeah, I love the idea of mycelium networks. And thank you, Priyanka and Sydney and Monica, for
Thank
sharing
you
your
so much.
mycelium networks with us today. And look forward to seeing more of your work in the future. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
so
Thanks.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for joining
Thank you.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.